Okay, welcome. My name is Janene McIntyre, and I currently serve as the Assistant Superintendent Vice President for Southwestern College. And in this capacity, I am responsible for overseeing the San Diego Campus Violence Prevention Project Consortium. Southwestern College serves as the organization of the consortium that includes National University, Palomar College, and to a limited capacity, San Diego State University. The grant that is issued and administered through the Office of Violence Against Women supports the consortium's efforts to bring awareness to member college communities about the issues underlying violence against individuals. And I make a point to say violence against individuals because the grant itself is termed as Violence Against Women Act, but has been expanded not only to include women, but also to include men and anyone that identifies himself in either one of those ways. That and the areas that we're focused on under this consortium and through this grant is includes, but is not limited to domestic violence, sexual assault, sexual harassment, dating violence, as well as stalking. And all of this is to further support the prevention of such acts and support those that have endured these heinous acts and are seeking thrivership, not survivorship, but thrivership, meaning overcoming, dealing with the impact that some of these things can cause, but also joining in with other individuals and encourage them to also reach thrivership. We hope today's Engaging Men panel, which is offered during our 2021 Domestic Violence Awareness Month, the month of October, will help you to better understand how men can play a significant part in our efforts. I will serve as your moderator, and the speakers of today's panel are Ming, it goes by May Zhang. She's with the Southwestern College's Human Resource Division, specifically serving as Employee Relations and Title IX Coordinator with the division's Office of Employee Relations and Title IX. We also have Luis Canseco Garcia, love saying his name. He's a Domestic Violence Education and Prevention Manager with Community Resource Center. We have Ronnie. He is also with Southwestern College, and he serves as the Director of Student Development and Health Services with the college's Student Affairs Division. And we also have Mike Smith. He's an adjunct professor in the School of Wellness, Exercise Science, and Athletics, also with Southwestern College. And also he supports or is with the Academic Affairs Division. Before we get started though, please allow me a few minutes just to go over some housekeeping items. First, please hold questions to the end when you will be given an opportunity to present them to our panelists. Please mute your connection to support everyone's listening pleasure. And just as a reminder, this session is being recorded and will be made available for you to view or to share with others to view at a time that's more convenient for them to do so. So without further ado, let's get started and jump right into the questions, which will be randomly presented to our panelists. So with that, panelists, please first ensure your mute button is deactivated. Thank you. So we're in the space of domestic violence and specifically engaging men in the process to prevent domestic violence, but also sexual assault in all of its different forms. And I'm going to present this question to Mr. Michael Smith. As a male, how do you hold your male friends accountable when they say something degrading about women in your presence, such as a sexist joke?
Well, generally, I try to ignore it. I know if that's the best answer for everybody, but I think when somebody gives out a joke and they think it's funny, they're looking for other people to listen and to support by saying, yeah, that's a funny joke, haha. And if I just look at them with a stern look and I don't give any facial expression that says, yeah, that's a great joke, but I give off the impression that I don't like that joke, it avoids confrontation with the person, but they get the idea that it's not a very funny joke to present to people. And sometimes they'll even ask me, yeah, you didn't like that joke, did you? And I'll tell them up front, since you asked, no, I didn't. And I don't appreciate those jokes. And I always tell people, there are certain lines in the sand I never cross. I don't do any religious jokes. I don't do any ethnic jokes, and no gender jokes. I think, jokes should be family fun, family friendly. They should be on Disney Channel. If they're not on the Disney Channel, they shouldn't come out of your mouth. And so I try to keep it very neutral and non-confrontative. But if they ask me a question, if I liked it or not, then I'll give them an honest answer.
Thank you. Ronnie, same question for you. As a male, how do you hold your male friends accountable when they say something degrading about women, such as a sexist joke?
It's interesting. For me, I've grown in this area. It tends to happen when you have a daughter. And then you start to realize some of the things that that impacts her and, in her space where she is and how she's growing up. And, when you have friends who may say something, I'm a little bit more confrontational with it. I'll ask where that came from. Why would you say that? And what is the meaning behind it? Many times when you speaking to folks and they make certain comments, you're dealing with their history, their background, the way they were socialized. And many of them don't call into question why they think that was funny, and this is across the board. When you're not a part of a certain group, depending on where you are, you are conditioned to believe some things are okay. But once we start questioning those things, we tend to, those who are able to, look at it and change. And if I call you a friend, you can accept feedback. And if you can't, then we're not friends. And I will make sure you're not in my space next time something like that happens. So I am a little bit more, I won't say aggressive, but more of like, what's going on with that, So that's how I handle it.
Oh, great. Thank you. Yeah, I'm curious, Mr. Hands, on that. I know you said as you have a daughter yourself, and maybe that's changed your view. Can you share with us, going back to your younger self before you became a dad, and if your approach is different now as a girl dad, and maybe how it was before you became one? Could you share that with us?
Oh, completely different. I was socialized to believe a lot of different things. I'm from Inglewood, California. I'm a man. In that environment, it is, it's a lot of, we want to say machismo, a lot of, that part of you is celebrated in that environment. It's almost like you indoctrinated with it. If you don't actually understand that's what's going on, you won't be able to actually change that. When my daughter was born, I noticed the dolls that she played with. I noticed the commercials that came on that she viewed. I noticed the hair products and everything else that went into her daily experience because I was completely connected to her in a way that I wanted her to view herself in a positive way, not in a deficient way. And that changed my eyes, the way I viewed things as she viewed them. Children tend to do that. I made a conscious decision to move to a more diverse place, Chula Vista, because I didn't want people to look at her hair and say, what's going on there? Or look, in terms of dating and everything else, she wasn't, she wasn't on an island or in a silo because of her skin color and who she is, along with her gender. So all those things, made me start being very conscious about the things I said, and the things, and the way I digest things in certain spaces. And it's funny, I had a friend who was worse than me when we were growing up. He had a girl and he's totally changed also. So it's I think those experiences are really powerful.
Oh, great. Thank you for that. Louise, would you please respond to the same question? Being as a male, how do you hold your male friends accountable when they say something degrading about women, such as a sexist joke in your presence?
Yes. What I teach the youth is that you have to speak up. You have to say something, right? Because it is our silence that allows for this violence to keep being perpetrated in our society, right? So we have to say something. So when somebody says something sexist or a joke or a degrading word about a woman, for example, you have to speak up. And I always teach my youth that speaking up against sexism or any form of discrimination is an act of leadership, right? Because yes, you're putting yourself in a really uncomfortable space because if you're around your friends and if it's your friends saying this joke, I've been there, right? I think many of us males have been there where somebody says something sexist and you stay quiet. This was me back then, right? I've grown from that, right? And so, but back when I was younger, I remember those times too when people would say sexist jokes and I would stay quiet. And so I see my youth now, and they have come to me with this also. While we are talking about this topic about respect and equity, and so for example, one young man, one day he came to me, he said, Luis, my homies say sexist jokes all the time, and I know they're wrong, but I just don't have the strength to say anything, right? And so it is that teaching our youth that they have to speak up. Of course, don't be aggressive with your friends, right? Don't confront them in an aggressive way. Just say something. Just make sure you say something such as, bro, that's not cool. Even that thing right there, even that little gesture is gonna make something. It's gonna create an impact on that person doing the joke, right? So yes, speaking up, yeah, I always tell them that it's an act of leadership because when somebody speaks up, right? For example, going back to that example of this young guy came and told me about how he doesn't speak up, and I told him you have to speak up because it's an act of leadership. Yes, you might lose some friends. Maybe your friends are gonna make fun of you, but at the end of the day, I think many of the people in that group also believe what you believe, but they themselves are silent about it because, again, socialization tells us that, right? Yeah, I think that's my answer.
That's powerful. It speaks to that. If you see something, say something, and encourages others to do the same. And that's what really brings about the prevention that we're talking about. The awareness, because sometimes it is an awareness issue. People don't realize you're socialized, you're conditioned. And then what do you do in response to it? So a different twist on this question I want to present to May as a female representative on the panel, and one that I know also has a daughter. I would like to present the question to you, but if you could answer it in a different way, meaning that being one that have been subjected to that, have been exposed to perhaps the sexist jokes and how to respond to those things, but as well as how do you approach, and your daughter may be a little too young for this, but if you ventured into those difficult conversations with her at this point, how do you approach such matters so she then, as she gets older, can properly handle them?
Thank you for the question, Janene. And I just want to say I appreciate everyone's candor here who has contributed so far. I will say from my personal experience, I felt like I was kind of like on the other side of the coin. In my prior career with the federal government, I've worked in an environment where it was predominantly men. And I've actually experienced scenarios where, you're kind of, as a woman, I understand there are stereotypes attached to my, personality as an Asian American woman, that, the qualities associated with that being submissive, docile, quiet. And I found myself in scenarios where it was very much like am I part of the group? Am I one of the boys? Until somebody says something, in the group where it becomes quite offensive to somebody of my gender. And there are times where I've spoken up about it and definitely found that to bring a certain level of ostracization to me at work because somebody spoke up. Whereas other times, if I just let it go and stay quiet, of course, nothing negative will come out of that. I would not be made to feel like, like a social outcast or a pariah. So I found that in cases like this, as a woman, when I wish to address the type of scenarios, I would choose to have maybe a one-on-one conversation with the person bringing forth the comments, and just a one-on-one conversation to get an understanding and to have them understand how those comments make me feel, so that we're both in a safe space there.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, May. Thank you so very much. And it's really like you further that point about even as a woman, we can work against this. We can work to support the prevention and awareness by what we call that establishing boundaries. And even though that can be challenging because you may very well be ostracized, especially as a woman, if you work in a predominantly male environment where in setting those boundaries is not always received well. But in so doing that, you're bringing awareness, especially for those that want the support in being able to work against it, even though maybe they don't have the strength or the ability or comfort in doing that on their own. So thank you. In lines with that, often many men think that domestic violence is a woman's issue. How do you engage men to become part of the solution and change that narrative? Luis, if you could respond to that question for me.
Yes, thank you. So yes, we have to talk to men, young men and adult men about this problem in our society of domestic violence and also all the forms of gender-based violence, right? Sexual assault, human trafficking, all that violence that exists primarily to women and girls and non-binary folks. We have to engage them in this conversation and bring them to the table because it is not a woman's issue. And so I think that's something in our society that a way of thinking that when they think about domestic violence, people think it's a woman's issue. And so for men, it's really easy for a man to say, well, that's a woman's thing. I'm not gonna get into that. I'm gonna avoid that, right? And so even in the domestic violence field, I work in the domestic violence field and there's not enough men. I find myself most of the time being the only male in the room. And so that says a lot. That reflects a lot on our society. So yes, we need to talk about domestic violence and gender-based violence to our males, starting at a young age, and the importance of them speaking up about this problem and the need of them, because we need them. We need men to come to the table and speak about these issues that are happening in our society. And so teaching them, educating them at a young age. Yeah, that's one way.
Okay, great, thank you. And Michael, so how do you go about engaging men and really trying to become part of the solution in the pervasive problem of sexual assault as a whole?
Well, I have a unique position. I teach women's health, and I generally have a class of around 40 students. And I can honestly say that of the 40 students, I might get on a good semester 4 males and 36 women. So it's often seen as a women's problem. It's a women's issue, and guys shouldn't be there. And I've always encouraged all the guys I meet, you should take the women's health class. Best way to learn about yourself and to learn about women and what we all go through in life together is to participate in a class with them. And we cover violence, domestic violence. In fact, that's the unit we're on right now. And we talk about it a lot. And some of the guys who do show up will sometimes take a little offense at, why are you always picking on the guys? And I'll look at them and I'll say, well, quite honestly, we pick on you because in general, while you're still victims, guys are victims of domestic violence, there's no doubt. But the statistics really point towards the women being the big, the receiving end of the violence in terms of domestic violence, sexual assault, sexual violence. It's the women who bears the brunt of it. And so I really try to open up the guy's eyes a little bit to see where domestic violence, where sexual violence is going within the US population. And try to get them to understand that women represent a minimum of 50% of the population, in some accounts 51%. They are the breadwinners of our society. They are the ones who bring up the next generation. So by maintaining this negative attitude towards half of the population, you're not gaining any ground here. And in fact, you're hurting yourself and those around you. So I try to get them to open up to the possibilities that, yes, it does affect women more than men, even though men are affected. And what can we do together in terms of pushing this domestic violence away? We do focus a lot in the class on personality issues, what happens within a family that can bring domestic violence, substance abuse issues, financial issues, insecurity, jealousy issues can all bring domestic violence to the forefront. And how can we address these issues? How can we learn to talk to one another? And I really emphasize that communication part between the parties is learn to talk to each other, learn to ask each other questions, learn to give honest answers, and just feel free and safe to talk to one another. Communication is probably one of the biggest preventive measures I try to teach to all of my different students.
Thank you so very much for that, Michael. That is like so rich. Now, Ronnie, if you could follow up for us and respond to that same question with respect to making this issue kind of, how do you address it from the standpoint of preventing and helping and bringing awareness to domestic violence, but I would even say sexual assault as a whole.
Froze? Did you freeze, Janine? Okay, you froze. Interesting. You know, again, growing up, you know, in the 80s, 70s, you know, I've seen a lot of domestic violence. And one of the things that I think that we need to address anytime that we are trying to move in a direction of healing and growing is understanding how we have all experienced this, socialized by it. It was a norm growing up. And like Michael said, it wasn't always men, it was women also. And understanding why is this happening? Why are we reacting to each other violently? Why must it deteriorate in a way that calls for one or the other partner to have to resort to violence? I think that's an important question to ask. And many times what you'll find is that we all, the folks who have participated in this have a hard time dealing with some of the adversity in their life, or that they come from a home that was the norm. That's what you saw. So I think, you know, especially talking to my son or some of the guys that I mentor, is if they all, you know, many men pride themselves on being leaders, and which I understand, but part of being a leader is managing relationships. So when you see these things start to go a certain way, it's pressed upon you to be able to be the one who lead, to start using words. Use your words. Okay, this is how this conversation is making me feel. This is what's landing on me. This is how I think we should, you know, maybe walk away from this conversation right now, come back to it when we both are in a different space. But look for, you know, honestly acknowledging your past, and look for help getting through those things so that you don't repeat what you have seen or what you have come from. I mean, to me, that is the best approach in terms of, you know, especially in the neighborhoods that I come from. A lot of people don't seek help. They don't ask for help. They don't They won't acknowledge it and we won't talk about it. We just know that mom and dad closed the door and we heard a lot of noise. And then, you know, next day, so on and so forth. You know, that's the environment that I came from. So yeah, I mean, that for me, that would be one of the, how I feel like one of the best approaches are.
Yeah,
Would be.
thank you for that, Ronnie, because you touched on this cultural influence in all of this. And it really leads to, you know, the thought of men and the attitude of machoism and how they're supposed to respond and show up in the world, and how those things, I think Michael touched on it too, about your socioeconomic status, cultural status, how you were raised, what part of the country you were raised, or what other part of the world to have you have those influences are. If you could speak to that, Louise, really speak, I'm sorry, no, May, if you could speak to that, because you also touched on it earlier when you were talking about being one that identifies as an API, Asian Pacific Islander, and there's those norms that are expected of women. If you could speak about those norms, those stereotypes that are established of men that may perpetuate domestic violence and violence of any form against, whether it's against other men or against women that are subjected to this heinous behavior.
Yes, thank you, Janene, absolutely. You know, coming from an AAPI culture, I am Chinese American. I was born in China, and really, I think as part of that culture and, you know, the philosophy of Confucianism embedded within the traditions, there is definitely almost a greater value placed on men versus women, because men are considered to be the progenitors. They continue the family name, you know, the surname, the family line, the bloodline, and so forth. And, you know, growing up, I think I even experienced that with a lot of folks from the older generation, you know, grandparents who would treat the boys, you know, better than the girls, giving them more, you know, toys and, you know, toys, candy, things like that. And I think that definitely perpetuates this feeling that there is this gap between men versus women in those cultures, and of course, you know, unfortunately propagates the idea that it's okay to perpetuate violence against women specifically. You know, in my personal experience, unfortunately, I am a survivor of domestic violence, and it's almost a generational continuation. You know, I witnessed my father abuse my mother and myself, and as a child, I've often asked her, why wouldn't you leave him? And it's almost that traditional value being perpetuated, because she would tell me, well, you know, according to our culture, there's a saying, if you marry a chicken, you follow the chicken. You stay with the chicken. You marry a dog, you stay with the dog. So I marry your dad, and, you know, I'm going to stay together with him. We're not going to break up as a family. And, you know, I feel like it's really true in my case that domestic violence continues to a second generation, because, you know, in my own marriage, my ex-husband during the marriage, he was also abusive physically, and yet I chose not to stick with that notion, the traditional notion of, well, I married him, I better stick with it. I chose to get divorced, and you know, and that is really a way for me to break away from those ties, and for me to really seize my own life and make my own decisions to find a better outcome for myself and my child.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for your candor and your vulnerability in sharing that, May. And you raise a really important point when you talk about transitioning, which is not an easy transition to make when that is the norm. That's your reality. You know, Ronnie had talked about that. That's what he saw. But he made a conscious effort, you made a conscious effort to provide a different reality, to create a different reality, not only for yourselves, but for your children. So how do we establish that, especially appreciating that that is the norm? That is a lot of individuals' reality. That's what they see at home. That's what they see from their parents, their uncles, their aunties. That's all they know, where, as Ronnie said, the door closed and you hear a bunch of noise. How do you then encourage those that you know that are in those spaces that have accepted it as that's how things are supposed to be? How do you then encourage, what type of conversations do you engage in those individuals, not just for young men or men, but for women too, when they're working against those cultural norms and those realities that really has made up in a large part who they are? Luis, if you could tackle that question for us.
Yeah, thank you. Well, the best way is to talk to people when they're young, right? If we can get them when they're young, that's the best. But if there are adults, talk to your friends, right? If you have that one friend who lives who is surrounded by violence, and that's all he or she has seen, and he or she has normalized this, talk to your friend. Let your friend know, hey, that's not okay. That's you don't deserve to be abused. So this is not healthy. Let's talk about relationships, right? I think that's really important to talk about what is healthy and what's not healthy in a relationship. What's love? Right, what is dating, and what should be dating, and how do we date in a healthy way? All of those are really good conversations to have with those friends who might be surrounded by violence, because yes, I mean, if nobody intervenes, this cycle of violence is just gonna keep perpetrating generation after generation, right? Me, for example, growing up in a Mexican family, a lot of my uncles and my parents, they perpetrated a lot of that patriarchy and machismo. And so I grew up surrounded by machismo my whole life, my cousins, my grandpas, right, everyone. But it wasn't until I reached adulthood and I got educated, that's when I started realizing, hey, this is not okay. This needs to change, right? And so I need to do that work for myself, because I'm the one who is ending that cycle of violence with my generation. I don't want to pass this down to my future kids, right? And so that's the work that I need to do for myself. And it's challenging, again, because like I said, I grew up with machismo, surrounded by machismo. It's in me, it's embedded in us so bad that it's not something that you can just switch off, right? It's something that you need to be practicing and being aware of it on a daily basis. But yes, that's one way. Talk to your friend, educate your friend, and with the hopes that this person can end that generational trauma with them and not pass it down to others.
Oh, that's great. You know, a lot of what I hear you say is willingness to be vulnerable, having to step out into a very uncomfortable space. And Michael, if you could kind of take us a little deeper into that conversation. You kind of touched on it earlier, of some of the things that you do for your students that speak to that vulnerability. How do you reach someone that is, maybe their reality is domestic violence, sexual assault in all of its forms is just the norm? So how do you step out and allow yourself to be vulnerable to have those conversations to help you transition from that place?
It's a tough position to be in. I think if you have somebody who's a victim of domestic violence or sexual violence, they often put up a wall in front of them, and they get very defensive and very protective. And it's hard for you, the outsider, to break into that wall. And I think if you can show compassion, and you can show that vulnerable side, like, yeah, I'm probably experienced similar things. I can't answer for what you've gone through. I can only give you what I've gone through, what I've experienced, and show them that I can talk about it and I can heal from what I experienced, and maybe share some of the healing mechanisms with them and try to get them open up a little bit. That can certainly help. I try to teach classes in a way that I can express who I am as a person, not only just as a male, but as another human being, in that none of us goes through life perfect, and we all experience hardships, but we all have to find a way to get through it. And if I can share what I've gone through, or if I can share what I use as a coping mechanism for them to utilize, then maybe I can open up some of those doors and allow them to accept what we're saying, to come in and open up a little bit. The biggest issue is to get people who are very defensive and are very hurt, and literally they've got scars on their bodies, both physically and emotionally. It's really hard for them to open up to you until they can feel like you're not a threat. And so it's really important to not come across as I know everything, I understand everything, I know what you're doing, but you know nothing. You're just there to try to open up their doors and talk and get them to learn how they can start the healing process, and not just heal, but to prevent this from happening again. And some of my students have had bad relationships, and we talk about relationships. And we talk about, what is a bad relationship? What do you think a bad relationship is? And why is it that we allow these bad relationships to come into our lives? Is there something about us that welcomes it? Why? Why would you welcome bad into your life? What is it about you, the victim, who's allowing this into their lives? And what can we do in terms of recognizing a bad person and avoid them? This kind of, in some ways, is kind of a simple approach, but think in terms of disease prevention. How do we prevent disease from entering our bodies? We try to avoid that disease. We look for triggers. We try to recognize what harm may be facing us and learn to avoid it in the first place. Again, easier said than done, but it does take it's a long process sometimes.
Yeah, thank you. Ronnie, in that same vein, what I hear Michael say is humanness, allowing people to connect with the humanness. That's a part of all of us, right? And we're flawed, we're works in progress, and we've all gone through something that we're trying to overcome. So I know you mentioned earlier mentoring a lot of students that come from a lot of different realities. Some, as you mentioned, domestic violence, sexual assault is commonplace. So how do you encourage those individuals to step into vulnerability and show up in their humanness, to transition, to change from their reality? We're not accepting these norms as norms, but creating the life that they choose to live, absent domestic violence, absent sexual assault.
For me, I think, I want to acknowledge that each one of the students come to us, different avenues, different, backgrounds, different spaces, and really trying to get them to articulate what their goals are. And once you articulate your goals, well, how do we get there? And then start leaning into what hasn't worked, because many of us are coming back to college because it didn't work the first time, second time, third time. This may be our fourth time. We may have, because of a job situation, because of home situation, so on and so forth. Knowing that many folks come from situations where we see this behavior and it has become norm, but we never really articulate that. We never really actually give, acknowledge that this has happened. And it's almost as if it has happened, it's not a big deal, because it was going on with my friend's house too. It was going on in my cousin's house. It was going on in my auntie's house. And we have to first acknowledge that this is not normal. Like, that's not normal. Well, that does take a bit of vulnerability, because I'm not saying you're sworn to secrecy, but it's almost like a family secrecy. We don't talk about those things from the community that we come from. So getting some of the folks that I deal with to acknowledge that, yeah, I want something different. I want to get to this space. How do I get to that space? Well, acknowledging all the things that I come into space with that may not allow me to prosper in this space. Why is it that you get so mad when we're talking about something that may be a little tense? What's going on there? Okay, well, why do you feel that way? Well, where I'm from, You just don't let people talk to you a certain, okay, let's unpack that. Let's talk about how does that benefit you moving forward. I think the communication, acknowledging that it is real, being able to share your story. I find it very, I was talking to another administrator. This is before I was administrator, a while back, and it was one of those things I was asking, why, something they told me, why didn't they share that in the space we were with students? And they were like, can't, so on and so forth. I think when we humanize ourselves and we share who we are and how we got to this space, I'm on my third career. I went to 5 different colleges. I did this and that. It's like, wow, really? I'm no different. You just got to decide this is where you want to go, have your goal, understand what you have done prior that has not allowed you to continue on this road. And then you can do anything. You can be a president. It could be whatever it is, but they have to see themselves, have to see you as a human and accept that feedback in that respect. I find that works really well.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. There's a saying, there's a book I read recently called Permission to be Human. Yeah. And if we give all of that compassion by showing as our true selves, being authentic, we've all got something we're challenged and trying to work through. So thank you for that. So I would like to then present to the men, but I know we want to leave some time if our attendees have any questions, but there's a couple of questions I would ask for each of you to respond. But specifically, if you could start us off with this, Louise. As a man, what advice would you give to women that find themselves in this space? If I could be more specific when I say space, they are either in an unhealthy relationship that involves domestic violence or any form of sexual assault. What advice right now would you like to provide?
Who's that directed towards? Oh, I'm sorry, Michael.
Louise.
Louise.
I think that the most beautiful thing that you can ever say to someone is, you're not alone. I'm here with you. I think that's, for me, the first thing I would say.
Yeah, great. And that's support. Yeah. Michael?
Yeah,
what advice would you like to give women that may find themselves in this situation, victimized by sexual assault in any form?
Well, basically let them know I agree with Louise, you're not alone. I have ears, I can listen. I have a shoulder to cry on. I'm here to help you. That would be my first approach. But I'm also going to go from the hard to the easy. I'm going to say, you got to get out of that situation, right? You got to talk to people. You can't stay in a situation that's potentially violent, potentially dangerous. Women die every day from domestic violence. And it's a statistic that most people don't really focus on. People don't realize 4 women every day die from domestic violence. Over 2 million women a year are hit by a spouse, and over 525 million women a year are raped. And this is what we know. This is what's reported. The numbers are astronomical. It's beyond belief. And so we as a culture, as an American culture, and I include everybody in this American culture, we as an American culture have a pretty darn dirty backyard, and we tend to look down on others. And so I really want to get people's attention at how extensive this problem is. But at the same time, I also want the victims to heal and to feel comfortable talking to somebody. It doesn't have to be me. It could be somebody they trust. I just want them to find somebody they trust and talk to them and engage with them. And then I also want them to think about getting out of the situation they're in, if it's a dangerous situation, in a very safe way. I don't want them to get hurt. And also, if they are a victim of sexual violence, it takes a long time to heal. And I train EMTs, I train people to respond. And I always tell them that it's actually pretty easy from a medical standpoint to fix a physical injury. What's the hard part is fixing the emotional injuries. The emotional trauma can last for years, if not a lifetime. And so we need to give them avenues to safe healing, both physically and emotionally, and that would be my advice.
Oh, wow, that's loaded. Thank you, Michael. Ronnie, would you respond to the same question? Basically, as a man, what advice would you have for women that find themselves being victimized by domestic violence or sexual assault of any form?
I would want them to I would want them to actually ask themselves why. Why would you stay in that situation? What is it about that situation that has made you believe you deserve this type of interaction? To try to sit back and really think about the space that they have come from, because that really is an indicator of what we will allow in our lives, what we have found to be norm. And also ask, where is it that I would like to be, moving forward. I think when you start asking these questions, I think you start seeing your value in those spaces and why that is not something that's conducive to any human being moving forward. I think always asking why is a good way of coming to terms into regards of why you're in that space. Why is this happening? And many times I see a lot of folks repeat those relationships. They repeat them over and over and over. I've seen, I've been in a home where you see, your uncles doing certain things, behaviors, and they're constantly, doing things that are immoral. And they are constantly in an environment where that immoral behavior is acceptable. It's just the way it is in most cases. On the flip side of that, I've seen my auntie hit my uncle, just out of the blue. I mean, these are things that I've learned, So I would also, that's why I would always ask yourself why. Why is this okay? Why am I in this relationship? Why do I think this is something that I deserve? Why can't I use my words? What is it? What's going on there? So that would be my advice.
Okay, thank you for that. If I could turn that a little bit and ask May, what advice would she give women? What advice would you give men, giving the woman perspective that may be the perpetrator with respect to sexual assault?
Not to make light of the situation, but I have interacted with a couple of men in the past where when I shared my experience, their first reaction is, "Oh, where's your ex-husband? Let me go beat him up." That's not what we would like to hear from the men. Obviously, we want to, really hear from, the men in the ways that Michael, Ronnie, and Louise has illustrated, which is, being supportive and understanding that we are in a difficult place, and that we do need time to absorb what is happening and what options there are available for us to, get us out of the situation, and just, definitely being there for us and, helping us with even just, all these different strands of thoughts in our minds about what should we be doing, where should we go for help. That helps a lot.
Yeah, thank you for that, May. That is, as I think every contribution made by our panelists today about, from the men's perspective of what they're encouraging women to do that find themselves in that support is needed, because a lot of individuals, I have shared my story before, they don't even see what they're enduring. They haven't put a name to it. They can't, because it's part of their norm. And that takes a lot of courage. And there's a lot of other reasons too why people stay in things that they know does not support their best interests. Fear, seeing themselves as limited, lack of resources for these things, even fear of, if I leave, I will be subjected to bodily harm, or my loved ones will be. So those are real concerns. So thank you all for that. One last question I want to present before we open it up, and I'm going to present this solely to Luis, because this is his space. He's dedicated his life's work to prevent and eliminate domestic violence. So I would like to know from him specifically, what do you think the future holds for us when it comes to more involvement of activism and prevention and participation, specifically as it relates to men in trying to prevent domestic violence, but also sexual assault, whether it's projected against men or women?
So what I've been seeing working in the domestic violence field for the last, I want to say in the last 10 years, I've seen that more men are getting involved. And not enough men yet, but I've seen that more men are getting involved nationally, and people are starting to realize just in the last 2 or 3 years that prevention does work. So, we cannot live in a world where we only intervene, right? Yes, of course, we need counselors, we need case managers, we need more of those resources, but we can keep living in that world. We need to really prevent violence before it happens, right? That's at least that's what I believe, right? That we can prevent it, and we've been seeing it lately in the last. And prevention work is really new. I believe in the last 5 years new, where actually there's been a small amount of grants invested in prevention, and for this job position, so where you actually want to prevent violence, right? And go out to the community, bring the resources to the community that people need, the awareness, the education, and invest in the communities so that way you can prevent violence. So that's very new. Like I said, like just in the 3 years, prevention has been invested by federal and national grants. Not enough though yet, but I think we're moving into that, where we start thinking more about prevention instead of intervening after the violence has occurred.
Thank you, Luis, so much. I appreciate that. And as you guys are talking, I'm thinking about our panel for our next maybe Sexual Assault Awareness Month about girl dads, making a difference, girl dads, because understanding and seeing that these issues from the perspective of your daughter, as Ronnie had shared, is really a game changer, as I see it. I want to thank each and every one of the panelists, Mr. Hands, Mr. Smith, Ms. Zhang, as well as Mr. Garcia, Canseco Garcia, for serving as our panelists. For those that are listening in and that have joined us, if you know of someone or perhaps yourself need some assistance with this issue, domestic violence, as Michael has shared, it's destroying lives, it's taking lives, and not just individual lives, entire families. It's destroying. And so if you know of someone, or if you are that someone that is in this space and really just don't know how to get out, you're not aware of the resources that are available to you, we partner with South Bay Community Services Center. It's also known as SWCCD, as well as Luis Canseco Garcia's office. So if you need any information about some resources, reach out to us, and we'd be more than happy to provide you, connect you with people that specialize in a wraparound approach in providing you the resources that you need. The support that you need, that you heard about today. So thank you, everyone. We have a few attendees still in the Zoom. If there are any questions at all that anyone has for any of our panel members or all of them as a whole, if you could indicate such by a raising of your virtual hand, we would greatly appreciate it. So do I see any hands raised? I do not, and that means our panelists were extremely thorough. So I appreciate each and every one of you again. I appreciate your vulnerability and your candor and the difference that you're making in preventing and eliminating domestic violence in our communities across the country. Thank you and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, everyone.